people here. My name's Jennifer Nadel. I am a local resident, a writer, and ran as the Green Party's parliamentary candidate at the last election. The purpose of tonight's event is not to be party political, but to talk about solutions. All of us have come here because we're aware of the problem, a council that has failed to protect its residents, a council that has sold off community assets, and a council that has failed to respond to the crisis that it caused. So what we want to do tonight is try and explore some answers. We're very lucky to have an extraordinary group of panellists. So each of them will speak for 5 to 10 minutes, and I'll introduce them all in a minute, and then we'll throw it open to the floor to ask questions or, raise any suggestions that people here have. But really we're going to try and be solutions focused and come up with things that we can go forward with afterwards. A little bit of housekeeping, 2 fire exits, loos out there, I think, and yeah, I hope some of you, well, as many of you as possible, will stay behind afterwards to speak, and that's it. So, to start with, we're going to have Anna Minton, who's a writer, multi-award-winning journalist and academic. She's the author of 2 really amazing books, Big Capital, Who is London For?, and Ground Control, Fear and Happiness in the 21st Century. Just a couple of her books will be on sale at the back there. One of our local booksellers, Lutyens and Rubinstein, has come along very kindly in the evening to sell Anna's books, but unfortunately the publisher didn't get them here, and rather embarrassingly she does have copies of mine and only a few of Anna's, but if you go over there first you might be lucky enough to get a signed copy. Then we'll hear from Sian Berry, who is one of the Green Party's 2 members of the London Assembly. She's also a councillor for Highgate Ward on Camden Council. She's run for Parliament and has been co-leader of the Green Party. She has also been the Green Party's mayoral candidate twice, which is a very brave thing to do. In the last mayoral election, she was one of the few candidates to rent rather than own her own home. She's a fervent campaigner for renters' rights and was on the ground here helping very soon after the fire. Then we have Joe Delaney, who many of you will know. He is a member of the Grenfell Action Group and was until the 14th of June last year a resident in one of the walkways. Since then he's been fighting for justice for residents. You've probably seen him on TV. He has been fighting to hold the council to account and helping many local residents to exercise their rights. And finally we're going to hear from Eve Wedderburn, who is a local resident and campaigner. She was a central part of the volunteer operation that started the day of the fire and made headlines when she told LBC that Theresa May wasn't fit to be Prime Minister. She is a member of the local Labour Party and also of a number of really important local campaigns, including the campaign to save North Ken Library, and she's now involved in plans for some radical solutions.
I'm going to set quite a gloomy scene, and I think in many ways that's apt. By the way, can you all hear me? Yes. Good, I have quite a loud voice. It's apt because we are still in quite a gloomy place. So in 2009, just under 10 years ago, I published a book called Ground Control, which is about the privatisation of public space and the impact the privatisation of public space has on us in the city as citizens, and the growing fear and distrust that that leads to between people, and how the city is segregating as a result of that. Nearly 10 years later, in June last year, just 2 weeks actually before the Grenfell fire, my second book, Big Capital, came out, which is about the housing crisis. And actually, while Ground Control also covered many aspects around housing, I never expected that 10 years later, the housing crisis would be so closely related to the themes I covered in Ground Control. So I'm just going to explain to you briefly how in my mind those two link together. So taking you back to Ground Control, that opened in Docklands, and I set it there because actually I wanted to take the reader on a journey through Canary Wharf, which alongside the Broadgate Centre was one of the first large-scale, privately owned, privately controlled parts of the city, where the whole territory is controlled by a single private landlord. There are private security guards, CCTV everywhere, and very strict rules and regulations on the types of behaviour that can and cannot go on there. So all sorts of things from skating, cycling, rollerblading, eating, drinking even, and crucially, no photography, no filming, and no political protest. So actually these spaces are in essence not really democratic spaces. The book opened there looking at Canary Wharf and Broadgate, places that actually began in the late 1980s, finance centres, built to meet the needs of business and the image of business. What you started to see by the early 2000s was that actually every single new development in the UK has been rolled out in this way. Liverpool 1, 34 streets in the heart of Liverpool, Cabot Circus in Bristol, Westfield, the two Westfields, these large-scale open-air malls without walls, which follow this entirely privatised pattern. And actually, Sian is someone who I started to campaign with on this issue because, of course, Sian, through no choice of her own, works in one of these privatised spaces. More London, the headquarters of the Greater London Authority, is also a completely privatised area, which leads to the ludicrous scenario that actually London Assembly members can't even give broadcast interviews to broadcasters outside their own place of work. So these are the sorts of restrictions that we're starting to see on a very regular basis throughout our cities. And it really became very clear in 2011 with the Occupy protests, which had that very dramatic backdrop on the steps of St Paul's Cathedral. Actually, they had no wish to be on the steps of St Paul's Cathedral. They had wanted to be in Paternoster Square, just behind where the London Stock Exchange is sited, and they were called Occupy London Stock Exchange, echoing the Occupy Wall Street movement in the US. But Paternoster Square was entirely privately owned, and the usual rules applied. The owners slapped an injunction on the protesters immediately, and they couldn't go there. And actually it emerged that the entire square mile of the City of London is now a series of privately owned estates. Only that small area on the steps of St Paul's and a small area outside the Bank of England where protests also gather. Those are the only genuine public spaces left in that square mile. The other camp, for anyone who remembers, was at Finsbury Square, part of Islington Council, not within that Corporation of London territory. And I think that is very reflective of how deeply undemocratic the heart of our financial services, the Corporation of London, is as well. So these are some of the themes that I covered in Ground Control, and the book was very much about how these restrictions on democratic rights, all of this high security, increases fear between people, increases distrust between people, and is undermining citizenship. Now, fast forward to the coalition government coming to power in 2010, and we saw a raft of austerity policies and housing policies which really undermined social housing, housing provision, even more than it already was. But combined with this, we actually saw a programme of what some academics call state-led gentrification, which has been a London-wide programme to demolish housing estates ironic, you might think, at a time of acute housing crisis to demolish housing estates and replace them with apartments, largely luxury apartment developments, with a proportion of affordable housing. Councils argue that as they face 40% cuts, this is the only way they can cross-subsidise to build any affordable housing at all. Well, I argue in Big Capital that seeing as affordable housing has been redefined to mean up to 80% of market value or market rent, that is completely unaffordable to nearly all Londoners. And we have seen over 100 estates demolished in this way and redeveloped with these luxury apartment schemes. The Haygate estate has given way to Elephant Park and Elephant and Castle. Robin Hood Gardens is undergoing demolition at the moment. The list is endless all across London, many more schemes also in the pipeline. And what you must remember is, of course, this privatised model that I described earlier, the Canary Wharf security guard gated model, this, of course, is the model for all the new housing developments which are replacing London's housing estates. So when Lendlease in Elephant Park tell us, oh, we are building the largest new public park seen in Britain for 100 years. Of course, it's not a public park. It's an entirely private and gated park. As part of these processes of state-led gentrification, the sell-off of public assets, libraries, the sale of libraries, which has been, obviously, you will all be aware, going through the roof all around the country in recent years, and other community assets which you're all, very much engaged with here. That is also part of the picture as those get given over to these sorts of developments. So that's the sort of negative picture that I've been dealing with. But recently, actually, to my surprise and, actually I'm very hopeful that there have been some real moves to halt the tide of the demolition of housing estates. Jeremy Corbyn said in his speech to the Labour Party conference that once in government, Labour wouldn't allow this to continue. Labour's NEC intervened to stop a similar development in Haringey, a joint venture in Haringey, which has been a landmark decision. And just recently, the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, has published an estate good practice guidance which says that all estates must see ballots of residents, which actually was not at all what he was planning to say, as Sian has been very, very closely involved in this, really successful campaign, which she's had a lot to do with. So suddenly, things are starting to change, and I think that the tragedy of the Grenfell disaster has also played a role in shifting public opinion in this way. So that's my context setting, and then I think other speakers are going to talk about actually what might be done in what possibly, I daren't really hope, because every time I hope something in politics it doesn't really ever come to pass, but what possibly could finally be a more positive climate. So thank you.
Sian.
Shall I just carry on? Okay. So yeah, as Jennifer said, my job is to be an Assembly member for all of London. Greens are elected on the PR part of that election, so we represent everybody. And one of the things I've done is try to help with the problem that Anna has identified there, which is the creeping privatisation of kind of everything, like our libraries and our community centres and our housing. And the thing with the housing is, I mean, they're closing a lot of libraries and community centres, but with the housing, their mission has been to demolish the homes and replace them with other homes, and that has been where it's happened, a complete disaster. It's moved out the original tenants. The original right to buy leaseholders have absolutely no chance in that situation. And I'm speaking at a meeting tomorrow about the Aylesbury estate. It's the leaseholders there who've had an absolute nightmare trying to fight off having their homes bought out from under them when they've got absolutely no chance of living anywhere nearby with the money that they'll get. And I've been doing this since May 2016 when I was first elected. And this week is good timing because I'm actually starting to feel that there's some hope now. We've had quite a few green shoots come through the overall picture of a war of attrition. And I'm used to supporting local campaigns. My previous job was supporting local road campaigners. And there, you know, one of the things you do, the road never goes away. I mean, it'll be delayed, it'll be stopped for a while. But then a few years later, somebody else gets into the council and says, oh yes, let's build that bypass that we had on the books a few years ago, which the people fought off, but no, let's bring it back again. And one of the things you do is you just try and delay, you try and put off the plans, you fight them every single way you can, and it's a hard job. The amount of campaigners I've met have been really worn down by the amount of time they've spent struggling against the council and having to fight off bad idea after bad idea when it comes to their estates, when it comes to their plans. But I think in the last just a few weeks really we've started to win. In Haringey you'll know there was a plan that really just follows the model that Anna was just talking about, to take all of their council homes, parcel them up into one great big £2 billion deal with one big private developer who would take a 50% stake in all the assets, and then proceed to go estate by estate, demolishing, rebuilding, gentrifying and pushing out the current occupants in the way that we've seen happen all over Southwark and in parts of Lambeth too. And they're campaigners who were not just, and this keeps appearing in the newspapers, they keep saying like this is a faction of the Labour Party fighting another faction of the Labour Party. This is not true. The campaigners in Haringey who started to raise the problems with what's called the HDV, the Haringey Development Vehicle, started off being an incredible group of independent people, like the Pensioners Forum and like random members of the Green Party, like not even the parliamentary candidates of the Green Party, just random members of the Green Party and random members of the Labour Party and road councillors from Labour and the opposition councillors from the Lib Dems, and everybody started to realise that this was incredibly risky. They could see where this was going to head if they let it go ahead, and they wanted to stop the deal right at the deal stage, you know, before any estates were up for planning permission or anything like that, where the deal was being made for the finances. And that's always where you can get stuck, you can fight things off, but they go, oh no, we signed a contract, you can't stop it. So they got in there at the right time, and people there have been doing the delay tactics. They've been doing judicial reviews, taking things to court, forcing votes in the council. And yeah, as things came to a head, there's politically it's a febrile time because the council elections are coming up. This has now been put off, and it's a great victory. It is a victory for people getting together and fighting things together, for having these unlikely allies of, you know, the Greens, the left wing, and the pensioners all standing together and raising money to go to court. And it's really, really exciting that big deal has now been put off. That really means that people who need estates to be improved, who need their bathrooms and their windows done, can fight for that to happen in different ways and can fight for it differently on different estates because everything's not put into one big deal. The other thing we've won is, as Anna said as well, the policy that the Mayor has just announced to give residents on estates a ballot before any kind of regeneration that might lead to demolition goes ahead. This is something that just seems like the most obvious basic principle of democracy, that people whose homes are about to be demolished should have a say over what the plans are. But yeah, the Mayor was not in favour of that at all. I've brought the various documents along. This is what was published in December 2016, and it's the draft good practice guide, not a good practice guide at all, a manual for councils and developers to demolish people's estates and pretend they've listened to them, but actually says in it, we don't like ballots. Ballots are a bad idea. They boil things down to a yes or no decision. And I'm sorry, but if you're going to demolish something or not demolish something, that's a pretty binary choice. You know, that's a yes or no decision, and residents need to be making that decision. So we fought this. People from all over London, lots of public meetings were held, thousands and thousands of postcards were distributed and sent in, lots of organisations, again from a range of political parties, wrote in to the consultation and said no. And the thing is, in the consultation, ballots, do you want ballots, wasn't even a question. So in the consultation report, the bit where it talks about ballots under miscellaneous, And it's really funny because it says miscellaneous. A very large number of people wrote in asking for residents to be given a ballot, and then they give the numbers. And out of 2,000 people who responded to the consultation, 95% of them spontaneously asked for ballots. Now, faced with a consultation response like that, faced with the kind of political pressure that's now growing, and we did eventually get Jeremy Corbyn to speak about it, the Tottenham branch from Haringey of Labour took a motion to the conference which got voted through by the members, so the leadership had no choice. They've been very quiet about it up till then. And then in the Assembly, all the parties, including like UKIP, voted for a motion in December that I put with Labour that said all residents should have a ballot, so he had that to contend with as well. So I think the Mayor had no choice, basically. This is the final good practice guide for estate demolition that says where there's demolition, residents should get a ballot, which I think is great. It's the words we wrote it literally echoes the words we wrote. However, they're doing the technical consultation, and in this is the when this will apply and which schemes it will be used for, and it's basically good in terms of like what kinds of schemes, but it's about the timing, and it does say that anyone who's got funding agreed already by the Mayor, doesn't say if you've got planning permission agreed, it says if you've got funding agreed by the Mayor, then you don't have to have a ballot after all. You can just go along with the consultation you already held. We need to fight that off, but there's a consultation on this now, so I hope everyone will join in. So there's a couple of green shoots. We've also got new planning policies from the Mayor. The London plan is in draft form, and it should be a very democratic process. This should be where the people of London set the rules that all the developers, all the councils have to follow in the future, and it should be a way to write solid rules in that then mess with and control capitalism, control the market, control the developers in ways that make them do what London needs as opposed to what makes them the most profit, which is what has led to a lot of the problems at the moment. It can be very difficult to get planning policies that are really decent because the government has like a veto over them. But I think when you've got evidence, you can win, and there's lots of good policies we could try and put into that. There are threats. The Mayor wants to make London more dense, and that's often the excuse used for demolishing estates. So I think there are some issues there. But I think we can get some limits in there. We have already won some policies in the draft London plan, such as new policies to mean that there shouldn't be arbitrary rules made over new public spaces. The Mayor's promised, and we haven't seen the details yet, he's promised to write a public London charter to set out processes by which we have some say over those arbitrary rules that apply to places like my workplace, which I think is really good. There's other things in there that we like. We've fought for a London living rent that's based on wages, not the 80% of market rates that's been the definition of affordable for so long. They've left in a lot of loopholes on that, and there's battles to fight. But I think there's hope that with the new political climate, with people more united than ever around things that are basic common sense and good democracy, we can get some good policies into there. Now, the thing that gives me the most hope, I think, in terms of housing and in terms of communities gaining control of whole bits of London, is the community-led plans that are being made across London. Community-led housing basically seeks to make housing completely outside the market, to bypass big developers entirely, and to work with the people who have land to get hold of that land at a decent price or at a price where you pay for it over a very long-term period, and then use that to make truly affordable homes where people aren't buying things and selling them for profit. People are just paying a decent amount of rent or a low amount of mortgage to just own the bricks and mortar, and things stay affordable forever in these models. There's trusts, they're called community land trusts obviously often, and the trusts hold everything and make sure the rules are applied in the future. There's loads of really good schemes being put forward across London at the moment, and we're trying to get hold of public land for those schemes, places like Holloway Prison, which is closed, places like St Anne's Hospital in Haringey. Again, it's like a hotbed of everything, Haringey, at the moment, which is a big hospital site that could have all its hospital operations moved into a much smaller area, and then there's loads of space to build new homes. And also in my borough, which is just north of King's Cross, which is one of the big areas that were taken over by a big developer and made into public-private space. Just north of there, there's a industrial estate that's owned by Camden Council, where there's a load of really nice businesses who do things like make muesli and make architectural models and supply fish to restaurants and mend cars and things like that. So they're lovely, you know, local industrial units. And what they've done is they've got together with the residents on the estate across from them, and they've put together a community-led plan for that estate where they rebuild the industrial buildings and then build housing around and on top of those for about 500 homes. And that scheme actually can pay for itself because there is a lot of money out there that's what's called patient capital. It's things like pension schemes who will be happy to buy some land and then be paid back over time a slight profitable amount, just enough to keep the pension fund in profit and build up people's savings for retirement.
What estate is that?
They're not very... I'm sorry, it's Camley Street. Sorry, I didn't even tell you. It's Camley Street. It's not the natural park. No one wants to build on that. Don't panic. It's north of the natural park. It's where the industrial estate is. Look it up, and it's a great place. And it's next to a nice estate where the people would like to have more homes and like to have them at a reasonable height as well. They're all excited about that. And they can offer Camden a decent price with their patient capital, with their plans, with the normal amounts of rent they want to charge people, very low rent. They can give a decent return to these investors, give money to Camden and build these things. Why are these schemes not what we're seeing being done around London? Why is it that our existing housing estates are being preyed upon as brownfield land? Why is it that they are wanting so much to drive out the people who've been living in council estates for 40 years, people who've bought their homes under right to buy and could never afford to buy any other kind of home in London? I think people are starting to realise that those questions I just asked, like why are they doing it, well, they've got another agenda that isn't simply providing more homes, and that they can't get away with pretending that that is the only way to provide homes. And I think there are, although we haven't got any of these schemes are not built yet, they're all ideas that people are fighting for. I can't help thinking that the way things are going at the moment, some of these schemes are going to win through, they're going to get their land, they're going to start building things, and once people see that happening, nobody will put up with the other model that we've been told is the only answer anymore, and we'll suddenly see this big change and lots of schemes coming through. So I do feel hopeful, and I'm really inspired by a lot of I think it's about taking over things that already exist as well as building things, and I'm really inspired by the way that people around here have started to say, no, we want that library back, we want that college back, we don't want the council, the council here could not have been worse, and could not have demonstrated more clearly that it's better if communities sometimes run things, and I think it's really inspiring to see that going on and to see people across London saying, actually, we will seize the assets, we do want the land, we want to be doing things for ourselves. I think that's the thing that inspires me at the moment. Thank you. There's too much happening, so I took so much.
No, it's really uplifting. Joe, over to you.
One thing that I'm always struck by with all of these proposals is how innocuous they sound. So like the Haringey Development Vehicle, you know, it sounds so cosy, doesn't it? You know, look, we're developing your area and everything, you know, and I think it's quite ironic the word vehicle is in there because someone's definitely being taken for a ride. And I don't think it's I don't think it's the developers who are. Quite frankly. But I think this is the biggest problem that we face at the moment. It's so confusing to know what to go for and what models there are. I mean, none of us are housing experts, but in the last couple of months, I feel like I've had no choice but to become one, because we've got to think now about, around here in particular, what future there'll be for the council's housing stock in K&C. You know, so what sort of model do we want? Do we want a cooperative? Do we want another tenant-led organisation that's really tenant-led? You know, another innocuous thing, the tenant management organisation, you see. It sounds as if, you know, you can read that two ways, can't you? It's either it's managed by the tenants or it manages the tenants, you see. And I think it sort of began as one and became the other, you know, and I'll let you work out which journey it took, which led to where we are today. And I think this is what the problem is now. I was at the last Council Scrutiny Committee meeting back in January, and there I was told that if I want to have a say on how housing stock is going to be managed in this borough, I should join yet another committee. And, you know, I'm sure they'd work, you know, Kim Taylor Swift, and I always call him Taylor Swift because he's a little shite who likes to make a song and dance about it. So, yeah, Kim Taylor Swift told me that, you know, I should join this other committee, and, you know, I'm sure that I'd have my say listened to, and they were going to appoint consultants to come in and tell them what to do on all these things and everything. Frankly, I don't see a consultancy company in this country that's done a great job on any of the roles it's been in. An old saying I've heard about consultancies, they use your watch to tell you the time. You know, and I think that really does, you know, that just sums it up completely. The council will certainly tell them what time it is, and then they will go away and write a report that reflects that for them. And this is what the danger is. I'm constantly surprised by the fact that people who supposedly are elected officials often treat their constituents as an inconvenience. You know, I've said since the fire, you know, the Macpherson report gave us institutional racism, and I'd like Maud Bick's report to give us institutional indifference, because that's how I really see it. It's not that these people in power actually hate us, because, you know, hate would actually require some level of feeling and passion towards us, and I really don't think they have that in the slightest. You know, the opposite of love isn't hate, it's indifference. And I think that's what we are facing. We are seen as an inconvenience. We just happen to be on this land, which they feel they have far better, you know, uses for. Whilst the other panel members were talking, I was doing some Googling here, and I was looking at local rents. Now, the London living wage is £10.20 per week. So on a 40-hour week, that will give you £408. So if we times that by 4, we get a monthly salary of £1,632. That's before tax. Yeah? The average rent in this part of London is £2,000 plus. So even with an affordable house, you're looking at a £1,500 a month rent. So your entire rent is expected to go on the house around here, and that's considered affordable. You know, but you see, again, it's like this development vehicle. It sounds nice, doesn't it? It's an affordable home, and we're building this many affordable homes, and aren't we great for doing so? You know, and the problem is we almost have to become lawyers in some way, and we have to constantly review the fine print, because basically the people who are supposed to be representing us are actively lying to us again and again. And it was interesting the point you made about Haringey, you know, where people are saying, oh, it's disgraceful that these people have pushed out the current Labour management members in Haringey, and these poor councillors are being castigated in the media and things like that. The reason that's happening is usually because they're not representing the constituents who they are paid to represent. I mean, it's not people from outside Haringey who have forced this matter in Haringey. They may have got help from people outside of Haringey, but it is the residents of Haringey themselves. So for councillors to sit there with a straight face and say that, you know, they're having their arms twisted and they're being pushed into a corner, that's what you're meant to be. You're meant to be an advocate on behalf of the people that you represent. And you just are failing at this job repeatedly. And even now, with Labour being given more prominence in this borough, I'm disappointed by the Labour group on the council as well. I mean, this is the first time since the Grenfell disaster, the Tories have pretty much taken a back seat, and they're letting Labour make the major decisions at the council. So Labour gets proposed lots of policies and motions and things like that, and the council just blindly votes them through. And I'd expect something far more radical, to be honest, in this area. And it's one thing that we've not seen at all. We haven't seen anything unique. We haven't seen anything radical. We haven't seen anything to rock the boat in this area. We haven't, no, oh, we've had consultations, but what use are they? I mean, to give you an example, there was a consultation for the 3 walkways, the housing policy, for the people who are in the 3 blocks that are attached to Grenfell Tower. That's Tester and Hurstway and Barrington Walk. There was a consultation about the housing policy that there should be for them. And the report, I believe, is due back today, actually. Today's the 5th of May, isn't it? Yes? Today's the 5th of February, sorry. Yeah, 5th of February. I was thinking of May, because that's when we could sack them. It's the 5th of February today. I believe the report's due back today, and it should be going to the main council committee for it to be discussed. And yet the policy that everyone complained about, that they've supposedly gone to go and consult on, is the one that they've implemented up to now. So, you know, why the hell should people have any faith at all in any kind of consultation process where the policy that you are objecting to, and they said, okay, look, we're going to have a rethink, and, you know, we won't do anything until we've had this rethink and we've heard from you, is being implemented. And they aren't even doing it covertly. This is brazenly done to the people who are affected in those particular properties. And it's this arrogance, once again, you know, for the Conservatives supposedly are against the nanny state, but, you know, they can be awfully paternalistic, where we know best, you know, you just shut your mouths and just do what we tell you, you know, and head straight for that cliff and be kind not to look, you know, when you jump off the edge over there. We know exactly what we're doing, trust us. You know, and it's just outrageous that this stuff continues to happen. And it's Tory councils, it's Labour councils, it's Lib Dem councils. And that's what it really shocks me, that it doesn't seem to matter what political persuasion you are. You know, you get some beer and, you know, you get some champagne and canapes from the right regeneration company. You know, again, another cuddly word, isn't it? Regeneration. You know, it's like something Doctor Who goes through when they need to replace it. You know, it doesn't really reflect what the true issue is. I mean, a regeneration would imply that it's fundamentally the same thing underneath, but it's just got a new face. You know, so we'll improve the structures, we'll improve the buildings, we'll improve the landscapes and things like that. But all of these regenerations fundamentally change the demographics of any area that they happen in. You know, the leaseholders can't afford to move back once that's happened. The social tenants are usually moved further and further out in London. You know, you've got places like Kensington at the moment. Kensington and Chelsea have got properties now in places like Harrow because they can't get properties in their own borough. So they've been buying up properties in Harrow and Brent to house their tenants. And so then you've got places like Brent are having to buy properties in further out places. So Brent are going to places like Milton Keynes and Hertfordshire for properties that they can then house their tenants in. And it seems like what the ultimate plan here, whether it be conscious or unconscious, is to turn this city into another Paris, where basically you have the rich people who live in the centre, and, you know, screw the outskirts. We don't care what ghettos you people live in, and if you ever dare riot, all we'll do is we'll get the police to fortify the centre, and you lot can break whatever crap there is in your bit anyway, because we don't give a toss about you. And it's this real us and them mentality. You know, Westfield up the road there, none of that land was publicly owned. You know, the train station, White City train station, isn't owned by TfL, it's owned by the group who own Westfield. They actually own the train station. Jeez. Because they paid for it to be built. The bus station that's up there, they paid for that to be built. The Shepherd's Bush mainline station, they paid for that to be built. So they own all of these key public assets. And why on earth are they owning them? How the hell is this seen as logical or practical? You know, our council, Kensington and Chelsea, couldn't afford £200,000 for a sprinkler system in Grenfell Tower, but they could spend £200,000 for a noise and nuisance complaint for a resident on Campden Hill, I believe it was, who didn't like the fact that his neighbour's son was playing the piano the whole time. You know, what awful noise from a piano. You know, we've had Notting Hill Carnival around here for bloody years, and we got the helicopter over us all night, you know. But no, the piano, this boy playing classical music on the piano. And the complaint that the resident put in, and the council spent £200,000 fighting in court, by the way, because the boy's family kept appealing against the decision. The complaint that the complainant put in, it was brilliant. There was one line he put in his complaint, and he said that the noise was so awful at times he had to go and live in one of his other homes.
Bloody.
Awesome.
You know, and it was only in the immediate aftermath of, while Grenfell Tower was still smouldering, that Kensington and Chelsea actually dropped this environmental health complaint. Now, what does that show you there? I mean, if it was a genuine noise and nuisance issue, they shouldn't drop it, because it's obviously causing a noise and nuisance, and they have a statutory obligation to defend, you know, to stop this happening. But the fact that immediately when that tower burned, and they were already getting castigated in the press, they thought, oh look, we can't do this anymore, and they dropped it. What does it show you there? They were just looking after their own. Why is there, you know, when there was issues about the supercars being driven around Knightsbridge, you know, that they got their entire legal team to work, and they've come up with this exclusion zone thing, which is kind of like an ASBO, So there's now basically an area where they can actually stop certain vehicles being driven by certain people, just in order to prevent them from making noise, you know, and disturbing the shoppers in Harrods and Julian Assange down at the embassy and whoever bloody hell else lives down there at the moment. And it's these sorts of issues that they're willing to throw money at. And yet they won't throw money at things like, rebuilding some of the estates around here. And I've yet to see a regeneration project where, even Stonebridge is a good one, because I worked at Brent at the time. That project is seen as a success by all accounts. And yet the number of houses that are on that land was severely reduced. You know, when it was bigger estates, it may not have looked as nice, but it did house more people. And those people were housed in bigger properties than they are now. But, oh no, that's not what we need. What we need is somewhere that looks good. So we need this area to look good. And it's this arrogance of the councillors who are involved as well. That they see this as like, it's their right to do this stuff. And I can't help but think, a lot of the times our voting system is a big problem. I would much rather see a proportional system around here, because even in this seat, until Emma Dent-Coad became MP by 28 votes, by the way, that was all she won, by 28 votes around it. Until then, this was the safest Tory, seen as one of the safest Tory seats in the country. I mean, we've had Michael Portillo and Alan Clark as some of our previous MPs. Real Tory grandees were given this seat. It was seen as a very safe and secure one. And so basically, at every general election, if you weren't voting for the Conservatives, your vote was wasted, basically, because it didn't matter. It wasn't like the fact that you voted for someone else, it counted towards something that would then benefit whatever party you voted for. It was just wasted. And that's why you see that people in this country disengage from the political process. Because they can see this, that when you're in certain parts of this country, it doesn't, if you don't, what you end up having to do is you don't vote for who you want to win, you vote against who you don't. And that's a very disappointing system to have to be in. In 1997 we had the Project GROT, as it was known, and it was G-R-O-T-T, it was get rid of the Tories. And what this group was showing at the time was how people should vote in every constituency around the country, in order to just make sure that a Conservative MP wasn't re-elected. And that's disappointing for the fact that, there are probably lots of people who voted, say, Labour or Lib Dem at the time, who didn't support the policies of those parties, but they just hated the Conservative Party more. And so they were forced to do this. And we shouldn't have to play these. Again, we have to read the fine print and, know how to play the system and work the system. And this is a system that's supposedly designed by and for us, and that we represent people, we elect people to represent us, and they are supposed to be looking after our interests, and yet they don't. And I'm just continually shocked that this is the situation that we're in. There's a great film that talks about this, Dispossession, the great social housing swindle. If any of you haven't seen it, if you go dispossessionfilm.com, there's details on there, because I believe it's available to stream now, so you can watch it. But there was one statistic in that film that's still stuck with me, and it was in 1979, before Thatcher came to power, over 80% of people in this country lived in social housing. And by 2010, less than 8% did. And look at that's a hell of a dramatic turnaround, in what, 3 decades? That's absolutely amazing. That it turned this dramatically around. I personally, I don't have an issue with right to buy if the money earned from right to buy went into building new housing stock, but it didn't. It didn't even go into maintaining what little housing stock was left. And now we have, these super housing associations like Genesis and Catalyst, and again they've got all these innocuous sounding names, haven't they? Where's the housing word in these names now? Genesis Group and Catalyst Group and the Guinness Group and all the other ones. Women's Pioneer is another one that's around here, and things like that. It just beggars belief. They seem to have forgotten what their missions are and what they were set up to do. And these are supposedly non-profit organisations. And yet they're playing exactly the same game as the rest of them are at the minute. And I find it incredibly disheartening that this is the situation that we're in, you know. It's great that Shelter have now announced that they're doing their commission on housing. And I do hope to be a part of that, because I met a couple of their people just before they made the announcement. Because obviously we're looking at models now to try and replace the TMO. Whilst we've got, whilst we have some kind of upper hand with the council, we may as well take advantage of it and try and set up a decent legacy for the people in this area. But, you know, it shouldn't be up to Shelter to be doing these sorts of commissions. You know, this should be something that the government did. And I know they love talking about the big society and things like that, especially the Conservatives. But, you know, we saw the big society in action around here on the night of the fire, because I certainly didn't see any council staff who were offering help to people who were coming out of the tower or being evacuated from the walkways or evacuated from surrounding area. I saw locals, I saw local volunteers. I saw local volunteers band together to form local groups. And then they were offering help through these groups, and many of them continue to do so to this day for free. And the council just sat there and twiddled its thumbs and kept saying that this was an unprecedented situation. You know, if we'd have even had 1% of the organisational capacity that Kensington and Chelsea puts into herding us around here like cattle every Notting Hill Carnival, we'd even had 1% of that organisation and know-how and capacity, we wouldn't have been in that situation that night. And people wouldn't have been sleeping rough on the grass just across the road here, around this tower, because they weren't given hotel accommodation. And how hard is it to get hotels? You know, have they not heard of Google? You know, you can quite easily go on Google, hotel W10, hotel W11, etc. They've got corporate credit cards. They could have easily booked every single hotel room that was free around here and put people in them even for those nights. But apparently that was beyond their wit too. But, you know, then they can go and spend £200,000 helping one rich person fight another rich person whose son is playing the grand piano too loudly. Or, you know, fight supercars being driven around a rather leafy part of our borough. And it really does show you that the attitudes of our elected officials are just, I mean, I really despair, to be honest. I really do think that they are beyond redemption. In many, many cases, they are absolutely beyond redemption. What they have done in the last 30 or 40 years has been inexcusable. What it has led to has been inexcusable. You know, we were first warned about these issues with Lacanau back in 2008, I believe it was. And then there were 4 other major fires before Grenfell. You know, so again, they were warned again and again and again. And they just didn't care. You know, they literally didn't care. They were indifferent to the problem, because we're not the people who are lobbying them. You know, we're not the ones who pay for, you know, who sponsor their MPs' constituency offices and sponsor their parliamentary offices, you know, and send them on holidays, or even send them to places like the south of France for that housing conference every year. What's it called?
MIPIM.
MIPIM, that's the one, yes. You know, every year you've got people from virtually every council in London, and most of the councils around the country send people to this conference in the south of France to discuss social housing and the future of social housing in this country. Why the hell do you need to go to the south of France to do that? What's in the south of France that isn't here? Why can't they go to the Haygate estate? Most of that's empty at the moment and it hasn't been demolished yet. You know, there's certainly plenty of room for them to do it up there. And if anything, being surrounded by an estate that was deliberately allowed to run down in order to justify the council's excuses for getting rid of it in the managed decline project, as it's so cosily known in these circles. Again, just shows you these people are completely out of touch. But unfortunately, we're to blame for this fact as well. Because, you know, there are certain parts of this country where it wouldn't matter. You could put a bloody zebra and pin a red rosette to it, and people will blindly vote it in because it's representing Labour. And in other areas, you know, you can get an elephant and put a blue rosette in it, and people will vote it in because it's Tory. And that's why I think we need a voting system that is far more representative in this country. And what concerns me now is that central government are currently consulting on changing the London system. So even the London voting system...
They've given up on that idea.
Oh, they've given up on that
Yeah, we saw that off, don't worry.
But for how long has that been sort of seen off? You know, again, it's like you said, where these things seem to be put to bed and they say they're not going to do them, and yet they always get resurrected. It's like the third runway at Heathrow. How many times have they been told no? And yet still this comes up again and again and again for it to be done at some point. You know, the widening of motorways. People will complain, people will march, people will write petitions. You know, there'll be an election, people will promise it won't happen, it gets forgotten for a bit, and then soon it's resurrected once again. And it's the fact that they think that it's so arrogant, it's like it's inevitable. What they want to happen is inevitable, and we will get it sooner or later. And that's why whenever we have an opportunity to seize control of something, you know, be it a park or be it an estate, or, you know, even be it a library or a college or whatever, we need to take that, and then we need to make damn sure that whatever vehicle it is placed in, I hate to use that word after Harringay, whatever sort of management vehicle it is placed in to look after it for the future, is one that it cannot ever be removed from. And that's the only thing that we can do. But again, we have to become the experts in this field. And what am I paying these people? For Kim Taylor-Swift to sit there and tell me, I'm already doing this bloody scrutiny committee for free at the moment. I'm not getting paid for this. And I've got to sit there with all these oily Conservatives around me. Oh God, and there aren't enough showers in the world to make you feel clean after sitting at that table. There really aren't. And frankly now, a lot of the Labour people make me feel the same because of the way they've behaved since the fire. And so I'm already on one committee and I'm doing your jobs for free, and now you want me to be on another committee and do your jobs for free. You know, is there anything else I should do for you for free? You know, I mean, I thought we got rid of slavery in this country.
No, it ain't gone. It's still here, mate. Don't worry.
Well, it is. I mean, if you have to live on £10 bloody 20 an hour for the London living wage, it definitely is a slave
Well,
labour.
the birth certificate, you'll definitely find out there. We're all slaves.
You know, I mean, £10.20 an hour is outright London living wage. Living when? In 1950. You know, no one could survive on that money in London. No one could, without social housing. And yet what they're not doing is providing that social housing. They don't care how long it'll take you to commute in for a job. You know, a epoxy cleaning job somewhere in Canary Wharf. You can do a 3-hour commute in the morning, and you can do a 3-hour commute that night to get home. And why? Because we don't give a toss about you, that's why. And that's what we're up against. I don't mean to sound all doom and gloom, but frankly, this is the situation we are in at the moment. Our politicians feel they can get away with murder, because most of the time they can, because, you know, come election day, people have usually forgotten whatever scandals they've experienced in their time in office. When I was doing A-level politics, the phrase that was used was electoral dictatorship, because basically you have a say once every few years, and then after that they do what the hell they want. And this is the issue. Unless we continually hold them to account, and unless we demand better mechanisms by which to elect them and hold them to account, this is going to continue. And so we have a hell of a job as citizens, as responsible citizens, to ensure that this changes and to ensure that it certainly doesn't get any worse. Because if we don't do that, then, you know, it's as much our fault as it is theirs. But we're not the ones who are going to be making a penny off it. They're the ones who will be making the pennies off it with their consultancies and the sponsorship from their lobbyists and, you know, all these regeneration companies who are going to be making a fortune off the land. And that's the legacy that we'll be leaving for our children and grandchildren in this country. This is probably going to be the first generation that will be worse off than their parents. And unless we do something, that is going to be a pattern that will continue in this country and will get worse. So yes, all I can say is that, you know, we need to wake up and we really need to hold these people to account. And we need to, our politicians should be fearful of us. They shouldn't see us as an inconvenience. They should be fucking terrified of us, if you pardon my language, especially in a church. They should be absolutely terrified of us. They should constantly be in fear for their jobs. And until we get them in that situation, nothing will change in any significant way, I'm afraid.
Can't help wondering if I'm a bit delusional, thinking that there might be alternative models that we could pursue locally. One of the things that Joe said has really resonated with me is that after the crisis that you've been forced into a position where you have to develop an expertise about housing. And that's certainly where I feel that I am. But what I would say about that is that the corollary of that is there's a surprising lack of expertise in our decision makers. So there's a historical lack of understanding of local planning rules in this area. There's just a lack of awareness about the ways that public land can be used for public good and how you might protect that, because there are laws that could be used to sort of protect local value. There's ways of pursuing and ensuring that communities do and public land can stay in public hands. But what you need is a kind of, first of all, you need a political will, but also you need a level of information in your decision making. There's ways of getting money, absolutely, but there are also really clear ways that that local authorities have, for example, have the right to offer what is in effect a £2 million discount to locally led schemes. So there's a law that says that if you sell off public land or a public asset, that it must be done under best consideration. And for a long time, best consideration was understood to be a specifically financial term. But there's been recently, I think it's like 2008, 2009, Social Value Act, it's really clear that that best consideration can take into account a number of factors, and where you're taking into account those other factors, you can offer up to a £2 million discount to like a community-led scheme. For example, if you have a situation where that scheme would need more of a discount, you can take it to the secretarial state. Now, I'm not saying how successful that would be in our current situation, but the fact is the legislation is there that we can argue as a community for public assets to be handed to community-led projects, and for that to be done at discounted rates. That's been done successfully by RUS, which is the Rural Urban Synthesis Society. I think they're in Lewisham, are they in Lewisham? And they've got a plot of land to develop for £1. And they did that under that legislation. However, there's not a lot of understanding of that legislation locally. I know, through dealings with RBKC over the library, that they weren't aware, for example, that you could offer a discount. They thought best consideration was a financial term only. They have used that as a legal argument. It's not a legal argument. So there is a certain, I feel a certain amount of hope in feeling like actually it didn't take me long, or the library campaign long, or it hasn't, it has taken some of my time, but it hasn't taken me long to discover actually there are mechanisms available to us, and that we can as a community organise and start to look at other models. And I think one of the problems about the other model is where you've got local decision makers who aren't aware of those options, then they can't see a way out of. And also many of them, let's be honest, especially locally, have not been motivated to look at new models because they have no interest in providing social or affordable rents. I think I read the Latimer Master Plan written in 2010 described the Grenfell Towers having no legible purpose. Because no legible purpose. That's a direct quote from the council's consultants describing the tower, and that's because they don't understand the purpose of housing people, obviously. And I think that's the mindset that we've been up against, but we mustn't accept that as the way that we conduct our, the way that we see our possibilities. We are not helpless in the face of the council. This area in this community's long history of radical social action. Maybe I keep wavering about whether you call it radical to just take charge of your own community assets or to participate in that way. I don't know if it is, but it seems radical in the current climate. So it's wavered on that side. But it is, we have a really long and brilliant history of social organisation. Notting Hill Housing used to be, is the legacy, one of the legacies of that, and it's really, the wheels have come off it as a social good in recent years. But this community set up housing associations that did house people and did have community needs at the heart of it. And those people who did that are still around. That knowledge is still available to us. And we should be looking inside of our community for that knowledge. Sean talked a little bit about community-led housing, and that's certainly what I I've been spending quite a lot of recent time on, and I really invite you all to spend some of your time on, and we can talk about how to move forward together. But the brilliant thing about community-led housing is that, one, it draws on community knowledge. So the local knowledge that we have, first of all, like we've got this historical knowledge of how to organise, how to collectively resist developers, we have all of that. There's also local knowledge about what kind of land is standing empty. There is empty land, we all know. There's empty buildings, there's boarded up buildings, we all know. And usually if you ask about, there's local people who know who the owner is or what the history is, or, like, it's all there inside of our network, that knowledge, and that if we connect together, we can access that, and that we can use that knowledge to offer a version of this other model of community housing. We can also use that knowledge to make sure that any development that we're thinking about is locally appropriate. One of the major problems that we have about the development schemes that come from the outside, apart from the fact it's staffed by people who think tower blocks have no legible purpose, is that they don't really understand how the local community will work and move through that area. But we have that, we already have that knowledge. There is legislation that can make already that we can use to get together to ensure certain principles are followed when development plans are made. So there's local planning, neighbourhood planning legislation in the Localism Act, and there's specific kind of neighbourhood development orders. You can constitute as a group, you can draw a development plan, you put that development plan to your local community, you invite everyone into that development process, and people participate as they want. And then you put out your development plan that comes out of that, and the local community ballots it. You know, you get a referendum on it. And then if it passes, it becomes the local planning legislation. So it becomes part of the local plan, and any developer who wants to then develop something on that area needs to think it, or needs to do it along the lines set out by those development orders. And we have that. We have those knowledge, those legislations are available to us now. And what I think when I think about what kind of expertise do we want to draw in, we want our local decision makers to be people who know this and enable us to access it. We need to be talking to local decision makers to make sure that policy that we do have direct influence over. For example, we have direct influence over our own local plan, our own sort of region, just area version of the London plan. And we need to be making sure that our policymakers put in policies that we can then ensure that community-led and community needs are at the centre of any planning policy. And it is possible for us to do that. So I recognise Joe's despondency and sort of, I'm sort of in a more privileged position of not having to sit next to in really difficult committee meetings where, but that, we do need to be engaging with local policymakers to make sure that our the local plan and also that people are informed enough to know that we do not have to accept the developer's model. We don't have to accept the developer's model. Just after the fire, in the crisis, there was this moment where the City of London Corporation came and they bought a block of housing, and it was 68 units they bought, and they bought it for cost price, so it sold them for the cost price of that development, and the cost price was £10 million. And so £10 million, 68 units, it's in the region of like 130 to 180k to develop one unit. So as a social housing tenant, I will have paid that off within just under 19 years. I will have paid off. So I'm in the social rent, my social rent will have paid for a building within 19 years in the centre of Kensington. So where we think about money, it seems like the sums are vast, and really what's vast is the obscene, margin that's put on by developers. But once you strip that away, actually it is affordable within most social housing tenants' lifetimes to have built 1, 2 or 3 units. So there's no reason that we should be thinking or accepting the idea that money or that capital is our problem. It's not. Using the right model for development engaging communities in that development processing and making sure that those questions are at the centre of your local plan and how policy decisions are made is the problem. And making sure that people are informed, that we do actually have legislation, that we don't need, we can make we together could make a neighbourhood plan, we could decide to constitute a neighbourhood forum. There are more than 21 of us here who are in this area. We can make a neighbourhood plan. That neighbourhood can be very prescriptive about the kinds of development that we will and won't accept, and what kinds of ratios we might accept in, housing developments or whatever. We could do that very easily. No one in the council has the right to say to us that we can't do that. So it's really important that we do see ourselves as experts and see ourselves as capable of being experts. I think, that would be my major charge at my housing association, is that they assume that I'm so chaotic, and that's why I'm in a housing association, or I need a social rent, because I need to be managed, and they're constantly creating things like gardening clubs or stuff to make me feel better, because I'm obviously I don't need that. I need a house. That's it. And I also need you not to threaten me to leave it when your contractor doesn't turn up. I just need a bit of dignity, and I also am not so chaotic. And I was sort of reflecting on it today, because apparently it's the glumest 2 weeks of the year, so I feel a bit relieved, but I was feeling quite sort of glum and thinking, actually they push you into this position where, because of your precarity and because you are constantly working for free or volunteering, that you have ended up sort of absorbing some of that narrative about your own powerlessness, or you absorb some of that narrative about how difficult things are, and that's part of how eventually you're produced into looking like someone who's quite chaotic. I think if said to Edward tonight, if you took my phone calls and my conversations with my housing association from when I first moved in to more recently, I do sound like someone who's become increasingly unstable, because the more recent ones have been me shouting. But I feel really pushed into that situation, and that's what I must resist, and that's what I invite all to resist. The idea that, one, that we're powerless, that two, that the money's involved in building houses in the centre of London are unreachable to us. They are not. Three, that the legislation is all against us, or there's no protection. There is legislation that we can use, and we can protect ourselves. We can look at other models. People are doing it all over London right now. There's WETCH, which is Walston and Elgin Community Homes. Actually, that's quite a long-established one. There's Ouch, Older Women's Co-Housing. There's RUS, the Rural Urban Synthesis Society. They've just done their first development. There's lots of developments in London that we do community-led. And we are a community that, if anything has happened, been shown recently, that we are a community that can look after ourselves. We know, there is nothing that we can't achieve ourselves as a community. We must move forward with that feeling, instead of waiting for the decision makers who have let us down. And they've let us down out of indifference, but also out of ignorance. Like, they're just not informed people, and they've got no reason to inform themselves when politically it doesn't work for them. So, I just invite us all here to think that we can be powerful and make our own solutions that don't need to go via Kim Taylor Swift at all. He needs a minimal participation in our projects. He can just turn up at the end and clap. That's what he can do. I invite him to do so, because I'm really sure that that's going to happen in the local area. And come and talk to me, or let's move forward together, thinking that actually we already know how to do it. Why are we waiting for these people? They're not going to do it. We can do it.